Well, welcome to the Building Newfoundland and Labrador podcast. Start again.
No, that's it. What's the problem?
It's the
Welcome to the Building Newfoundland and Labrador podcast.
Construction Association podcast.
It's the Newfoundland and Labrador Construction Association Building Newfoundland and Labrador podcast.
You should leave this in.
We are.
Good.
B-roll.
Listen, he doesn't screw up much, but when he does, I leave it in. I'm in control of the edits.
Welcome to the Building Newfoundland and Labrador podcast. What a day it has been. Day one, women in construction. We are stronger together was the theme, and I can tell you.
Actually, we're better together, but I didn't want to correct you, seeing that we had trouble with the name of the podcast. You're the last. We've saved the best for last.
Perfect.
Go, keep going. What's wrong? What'd you stop for?
Because you interrupted me. What a wonderful day we've had. I mean, we've been in really some amazing conversations with people that are doing some wonderful things. So I'm Alan Dale, this is Jerry Crew. I can't wait to be in conversation with you. Tonya, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So I'm Tonya Whittle. I own a company called Tonya Whittle Inc. I joke that the name came out of the loss post-pandemic. I ended a business partnership and I had nothing left, and so I just started over with my name. So here we are.
It works?
It works. You know, I just put an incorporated, on the back of that thing and kept going. I shouldn't say, it ended, but I kept going doing what I've been doing for the last 7 years. And I'm a human behaviorist, an expert in human behavior, and I take that and I put a women's empowerment twist. So I understand why do we do what we do, and then ultimately how can I use that to help people change so that they can stop doing things that they don't want to do and that are disempowering, and help people really tap into their full human potential. Because I believe that we all have potential. I believe that we're all born with greatness. I believe that we have an ability to tap into that if we're teachable, if we're coachable, if we want something more, then there's ways that we can do it. So I take that sort of unique blend of sociology and human behavior and then boil that down into, why do we do what we do, and then how can we do better, if we want to do better. Ultimately, we can't make people change, but if people want to change, if people want to do better and reach a higher level in their lives, then this is something that, allows us to do it. So I take that and I focus on women as my primary focus. It can help anyone,
You're going to help two of us today,
Yeah, you're
so
gonna
we're
help
looking
us,
forward
yeah.
to that.
I mean, I don't know.
I know. I agree. I see, she's zeroed in on you already.
Wow.
Wow.
Tonya, okay, this didn't start from the stop.
No.
How did you get here?
So it's an interesting journey. How I got here ultimately, I guess, starts in 2004. I was struggling with body image issues, eating disorders, disordered body dysmorphia, I think like a lot of people, certainly a lot of women. And one morning I woke up and I thought, were we really just born to suffer, diet, and die? Is that what life is supposed to be about? And that really started a journey where I really started to embrace understanding what I didn't know about health, fitness, what the world wasn't teaching me. So I went and I found that, and I landed in fitness, in the fitness industry for 12 years. And I loved it. I mean, there's nothing more empowering than really seeing people, overcome challenges, and that's one of the, it's a beautiful place to be. But what I started to really notice was the struggle that people had. So I asked, if I could change and I could embrace this, can I learn what I did and then teach it to other people? And that became the journey of sort of where I ended up going back to my sociology roots and saying, so society makes us a certain way. It is, people call it that's human behavior. It's not. It's human conditioning. Right? It's human conditioning. We're born, and no one told us, anything about all kinds of things. You're born as a boy or as a girl, and now today we've opened up a different conversation where people feel they have permission to not put a gender on things. But certainly when I was and when you were, it was boy, girl, blue, pink. Yeah. This is your role, and this is where you go out. So I mean, our conditioning starts from birth, pre-birth really, in this. And so we start to develop, and we go out into the world and we develop these conditions and these limitations and beliefs and fears and all of this stuff that ends up changing how we show up in the world. And if we can start to unpack that and unravel it and then reinstall those belief systems that says, if you weren't told who to be, who would you be? If no one gave you a limitation, what will be possible for you in your life? And so that's where I landed sort of from the fitness industry to say, I got tired of looking at people who hated themselves every day, who were trying to hate their way to happiness, who were punishing their body, punishing themselves through exercise, dieting as a source of punishment. And not just women. I mean, I coached back then, I coached a lot of men who also, developed. Our body has become more important than anything else that we've created. And I thought, this isn't what life was supposed to be about. And so that led me back to that grassroots question, back to my social roots that said, how did society make us, and how can I contribute to unraveling those stories to allow people to really embrace who they are and, get on with living our best life? Because, man, like, my motto is that, like, as far as I know, we only have one go. We have no proof of anything else. And I want to make the most out of it. I want to live. I don't want to just be here existing. And I want to help other people do that, because I saw so much unhappiness. And I saw people really destroy themselves financially, chasing the diet world, and destroy their self-confidence and all of these things. And what ended up happening, I tiptoed into that behavior modification world. And then it became very clear that this problem wasn't just about health, and it wasn't just about our weight and our body. People started asking me, hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And so it sort of organically grew into a place where it became more focused. From my business focus is more about women, but it really focused into, the journey of how we can unravel who we are not, so that we can find who we really are. And that's sort of the Coles Notes, I guess, since 2004.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant, right? But just the sheer fact of to use your words, if you weren't this, what would you be? That in and of itself almost empowers you out of the gate.
Yes.
Right? That just gives you the, oh wow. All of a sudden there's some visioning happening. I was in the room there when you spoke, and you did something, and I'm sure you do it a lot with your clients, but you ask people to close their eyes and concentrate on their heart.
Yes.
And then open their eyes, and the first word that comes out. I did it.
Oh.
So I did it in the room. I did it in the room, and it was magical. Yes. It was kind of like,
was
you
that
just
your word? No.
Did Jerry come up?
No, it was kind of magical, right?
It is an experience, because it's,
and it was centered around the word that you were getting to was success.
Yes.
What is your definition of success, right? And I went through the exercise with you in the moment, and I came out, and the first word that came to my mind was happiness.
Yes.
Happiness was success to me, right? It wasn't money, it wasn't cars, it wasn't whatever, right? It was happiness and everything that includes. And happiness includes this conversation, right? So to me, I feel like I'm in that zone of success because I have this around me at all times. So I really enjoyed your conversation in the room. I want to tap into a little bit about, I've read some of your stuff on your website, and there was a hint of spirituality and things like that. Talk to me a little bit about that, where that comes from and why that's important.
Well, and the experience that you had, you just said it was very magical.
Yeah.
That is spirituality.
100%.
One of the biggest challenges that I think on my journey of uncovering who we are as people, and ultimately the question that I started asking that led me, all around the world, training under some of the biggest names in self-help and industries and intense with shamans in the jungle, and all of this. I was willing to do whatever it took to really unravel this. And during that, I realized is that to be human is to be spiritual. And unfortunately, we live in a world that, was hijacked by mainstream religion. Religion and spirituality are two different things. And you can believe in something bigger and some universal, people call it God, people call it universe, people call it all kinds of things. Kismet, synchronicity. There's words that we put on everything. And ultimately, what I realized during that journey was, to be human is to be spiritual. To be spiritual is to be human. And what I realized in that work was that the spiritual piece didn't have to be weird or, am I chasing God or chasing, people, get concerned sometimes, in our modern world, like they go, what's this really about, right? The woo-woo. Yeah. Or, even beyond that, for me, when I first would have heard it, I was raised Catholic and didn't want to be like, am I born again? Like, is this what this is I really didn't understand it and didn't know. And then when I started sitting in these circles with people, we were having conversations about being good people. Right. We were having conversations about what does your heart tell you is the right thing. You've created this podcast and you're having an incredible experience. You're meeting incredible people and you're bringing voices to people who otherwise wouldn't have those those voices, that are out there, that's a spiritual experience because it's coming from your heart, and our heart is that connection point to it. And so for me, the spiritual piece is not, it took me a little bit to get into like out of my head and my own narrative about what it meant and what people might think, or those kinds of things, but then I just went with it and I realized it's only going to be what I make it be. And so that became something that I realized is that this isn't about religion, and it's not about any of those things, but it's about who we are as a person, ultimately who we were born to be. And so that became the experiences that I found.
Tonya, it's interesting, Alan, you're talking about narratives.
Yes.
Alan and I are on an incredible journey with this podcast, but there still is an internal narrative. There's days when I get up and I'm like, what am I doing? Am I crazy? Are you still having that as well?
Absolutely.
And what do you do to deal with it?
Well, there's a few things, ultimately you have to stop listening to it.
Yeah.
It's a liar. So when you ask about the spiritual experience and, what does that piece have to do with it? Our head is our conditioning. Our heart is our human behavior, our human nature. People say, oh, that's human nature. It's not human nature to bully each other, to hate each other, to fight, to kill, to, put each other down. That is not human behavior or human nature. That is human conditioning. We learn that in our world. And so when you think about these experiences that we're having, why the experience is so magical when I take people out of their head, walk through the forest, go into, and I do this in a way that you can feel it's happening. You feel that earth rising up to meet you, you feel the air and you feel all of it, you really feel as if you're there. And in that experience, it moves you into your heart, and it actually creates synchronicity between, there's all kinds of science behind this. So it's less, what I like to say now is science is proving the mythical true. So this is sort of a really cool time to be doing this because there's actual scientific, synchronicity between the head and the heart, and when we get them working together. So when that experience happens and we go down here, now your purpose becomes clear, the word that you're seeking. So that's a practice that I do to stop that narrative. Is that the narrative is fear and the narrative is conditioning. That's telling us, reasons to go home, reasons to give up, why we're stupid, why this is never going to work. And that becomes our self-sabotage. Yeah. And so we need to learn that it's always going to be there. But we can learn, we stop giving it a stage. Yeah. Don't give it a platform, don't. One of the things I do like to do first is I do like to give it a platform. I like to go, hey, fear, or hey, this belief system that I have. I actually have a process where I say, I write a letter with it. Dear fear, what are you trying to teach me? What are you really afraid of? These are the experiences that I take, my clients and myself on, as we do this. So I'll say, let's get in bed with fear. So first I want to give it a stage. And then I want to bring it up and I want to find out what it's here to teach me. Because it's teaching you something. You're afraid for a reason. There's something there. And if you can bring that up, you bring it sort of into the light, for lack of a better word, but we bring it into the conscious. We bring it out of the unconscious mind into the conscious mind, and then we can fight it. You can't fight what you can't see. No. So then you can bring it up and you can go, that's so silly, I'm just afraid of failing. And what's the chances, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if you fail? And second, for most people, certainly people that you're having conversations with, or even for yourself and people who are watching this podcast, what's the chances of that actually happening? Right. Because we're the type of people that even when we fail, we turn that obstacle into an opportunity, and we build a foundation, on the bricks people threw at us. So this is how we can actually end it. The narrative is always going to be inside of us, I believe, and it's never going to go away. And instead, we need to learn to live with it, find out what it's here to teach us, and then start talking back to it, or telling it to simply shut up sometimes, right? Yeah. Les Brown says this. He says, sometimes you got to wake up and look in the mirror and say, shut up. And, because that noise. Yeah. And so the experience that I like to do is sort of a combination, and it's learning to trust yourself about what one you need. Sometimes we need to just go sit in our car for a moment if we're scared, especially people in business. Sometimes, during the pandemic, people were reaching out to me. They weren't sleeping. They might lose their home. These are panic. My business was, I was running international women's events at the time the pandemic was declared.
Really?
I was at my book launch in Nashville when the pandemic was declared. My business turned off overnight. And then transitioning, people expected, let's transition to an online world. And some people really were able to do that really quick, or they were poised for that market. Some of us weren't, or what I do doesn't translate well to online. Yeah. Let's get out and have experiences, but okay, I'm going to sit you in front of your computer for 8 hours. That didn't translate. So people were calling me, and I was going through the same thing. of recognizing that, this is here and we have to deal with it. And so what's the strongest way we're going to come out on the other side of it? So the voice is always going to be there. You've got to find out what it's trying to teach you, what you're scared of, deal with the fear, or sometimes just quite simply tell it to shut up. Yeah. Or the third one is do the hand heart or the heart breathing that I taught today, which is just sometimes I put my hand there because it's just a visual thing, or just take a few breaths as if you're in your heart, and then it settles your nervous system. And from that place, then you can hear a little bit more of your own authentic voice, which is going, you know what, you know how to do this, or it's gonna be okay even if it's not okay, right? You're gonna be okay because you know how to do this and you know how to build this because you know who you are and you know what you're capable of. And that's the power of sort of bringing it in here and recognizing that we're never gonna end those voices. We've been conditioned with them, and the outside world is constantly giving us reasons to find them at a deeper level. So it's learning to navigate and not listen to them. They're not true.
Tonya, wow. Great.
Sorry, I went off there.
No, all right. I'm going to go write a letter to FAIR right now. You continue the podcast. Love that, by the way.
A great explanation, and I love one line you had in there, the bricks that people throw at you just become the foundation to build on. Fantastic, and great words for sure. Okay, explain to me the connection with the Newfoundland and Labrador Construction Association. You're empowering women, I understand. Today is Women in Construction Day. Explain to me how this relationship formed.
So the relationship formed, which is, always really exciting to get, into new industries. Last weekend I was speaking at a healthcare, place, and a lot of these conversations, when you say the bricks people throw at you, 7-8 years ago, people were sort of, especially when you brought in the spirituality piece or, the letter to fear piece. There's a lot of people who made fun of some of those things, right? And I didn't care because for the first time, I built that inner sort of resilience to know that they're not the people who matter. Right. They're not the people I can help, and nor am I trying to help them. So I just kept going. And so what's happened, I think, is like everything organic. Someone opens a door and then another one opens and another one opens and another one opens, and you just keep going. Right. You just keep saying yes to the experiences that feel good. And so I had, a person who was doing all my marketing and the firm that was doing the rebuild. When I said, hey, I have this thing called Tonya Whittle Inc. Could you brand this for me? And then that person came to a few of my events because they really wanted to see what I did, and their mind was like, oh my, so she was mind blown over this, and then started to open more doors to people. So Rhonda Neary at the NLCA was one of those people, and when she came, her and I had a conversation. She listened to a bunch of my podcasts, and then she just called me and said, I need to have a meeting with you. We are having a Women in Construction event, and I need you to have these conversations, because the question that they asked me when they posed, for me to come and be the speaker here, was look at the wall behind us, and out of all the years, there's 2 women on that wall. Where are the women? Why aren't more women stepping up? Why aren't they putting their names in positions of power? So that became the connector, and I had the answers to that. Most people don't know today why women are consistently paid less. People don't know that. The reason is because they don't ask for it. Right. We're not asking for seats at the table. We're accepting, positions in the back of the room. For a very long time, women had to bring a folding chair to the table because there wasn't a space. So we had to bring our own chair and pull it up and force our way in. And then they put a chair at the table for women. And then women started building tables and building rooms. And now here we are today with an entire day added to a conference just for women in construction. Right. So the connection was with Rhonda recognizing the conversation that I was having and saying, this is the gap that we have never been able to answer. And that was how that relationship formed, and that I came here today to be able to have this conversation with, 120 something women, but then also, all the men, you've been a part of it, you've been a part of the conversation. Several men were here and all came up to me, to say it was such an interesting perspective shift that they just had never thought of. And that's our unconscious bias, right? That's there, that until we hear something different. So that became the part, is that, if we're gonna really grow these industries, male dominated industries, it has to be more than a folding chair at a table, and it has to be more than getting your foot in the door. It has to be welcoming women, to a higher stage and to positions of power in these organizations because we have something to offer.
Right.
There are industries that have not yet formed. There are businesses that have not yet formed because women's voices are not at those tables. Some of the greatest projects in some of these industries are not yet here, because when you bring and have conversations like we're having, bigger things come from those things when we can collaborate and have different perspectives. And not just women, we need to start putting more minorities, people of color, more indigenous voices. We need to start elevating these people into different positions. And the question becomes, but the space is open and they're not putting their name in.
Right.
So it's not just let's open the door, because the door is open but people are not showing up, and that's where I come in.
Right.
And that was my role, is to help people overcome these narratives, these blocks, these disempowering experiences, or women's long-term and human conditioning that is making us afraid to put our name into these places. So
Just speak up.
just speak up.
Oh, it's a great perspective, and I watched a little bit of it, and that makes perfect sense to me now, because I walked in midway through it and I was like, what's the direction to go? And now I get it. It's completely perfect. I mean, you must be so inspired when you see an association that's as big as it is and as established as it is, reaching out and saying, I need some help.
Yes.
That must make you feel good.
Absolutely, because it's not the way that we did things doesn't exist.
Right.
Now, it wasn't going to exist anyway, but the pandemic accelerated that. And so our systems and our infrastructure, the way we did things is crumbling underneath us. And the way that's going to be forward, we need to build something new. It doesn't exist yet. And the only way we can do that is when we really begin to collaborate and have different, more empowering conversations. And people have to understand our history to understand our future and where we're going to go and what we're going to be able to create from that. So it's incredibly inspiring, because we can have conversations all day long, but it's not until corporations and, massive healthcare foundations that are calling to have a bigger conversation, that's where the change happens, is in these kinds of rooms, because these are the people, the policymakers, the lawmakers, the people who have the ability, like today they just announced pay equity, right? Because we're saying women are not getting paid as much because they're not asking for it, but they shouldn't have to ask for it. There should be a transparency.
It's shocking to me that was only announced today.
Yes. Yes.
Frankly.
And it's across the board, many people don't. And so if we're not aware of sort of the statistics or what's actually happening, that less than 8% of women are still actually getting business funding and venture capital.
Wow.
I could have a really, really incredible business idea, and you could have a terrible one.
Right.
And you are still more likely to get the money than I am.
Wow.
And I have been in business meetings with women in funding 2 years ago who were asked if they had a partner to support them.
Really?
In big banks. So we're still really our systems are deeply entrenched and embedded in this. And what we have to start realizing is that it's corporations like this, organizations and associations like this, that are going to be what's going to make the change for us,
Tonya, you're blowing my mind, and it's easy for me to say, because frankly, I've never experienced any of that. White, male, middle-aged guy.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think it's important to listen to you, because the men out there that are watching this need to hear this, because frankly, I've never experienced it. My wife has never experienced it. So I'm clueless.
Yes.
Clueless.
Yes.
I'm admitting it here today. Well, you knew that anyway, but I'm clueless. Right?
But this is also how the conversation, happens. And this is why I always say to people, it's not just women's empowerment work. Obviously, these conversations work for anyone. We all have an inner narrative. We all have blocks. We all have these things. It's not just about women.
Right.
I really like the component of adding, the women's empowerment to my work. But men, we need men as allies.
Right.
We need men. It's not about putting men down, and it's about creating an equality, or not even equality, but equity, right? Because equity is where, like if someone needs more, they get it. If someone needs, these kinds of things. But it's through partnerships and allies and building those connections and communities and rebuilding. A part of my talk today was about the history, and about 5,000 years ago when the fringe societies rose up because women had created metal. And these are, things that are being uncovered in archaeological digs right now. And without getting into too much history, what they're actually uncovering in these archaeological digs is that men and women were equal.
Right.
It wasn't just a patriarchal society, because a lot of people think, well, if it wasn't the patriarchy, it must have been the matriarchy. That's not true.
Right.
It wasn't. It was equality. Men and women contributed to society, because obviously that's, it just sort of makes sense when,
right.
when you think
we're
about
just
it,
getting
right?
back to it.
Right. And so what my goal is not to put anyone down, or not to make men not fit in the room or not be a part of the conversation, but is to elevate, as we elevate each other, we all come up together, and we can't make inroads. The NLCA wouldn't make inroads like this if the men at the table weren't willing to have these conversations, to open the doors. And so men like you admitting that, I need to be a part of this conversation because I've never heard it, is how we continue to move forward together, not just saying, oh, well, this is just for women, or this is just for men, or this is, any of these things. That's how we create the change.
I love that. And just one more point. Frankly, sometimes it does feel like some women are trying to put men down. And I've felt that. And then I'm like too afraid to say a damn thing because, you're backed into a corner. But I love listening to you talk about it, the way you articulate it, just it's clarifying things, frankly.
There is, just like there's men who are out there who absolutely don't want women at the table. There are, we're at the construction, you can bet your bottom dollar that there are men who do not believe that women should be in the industry, and they might not say it, but they're thinking it and they're feeling it. And
they stopped the video about 10 minutes ago, right? Those ones.
Yeah, they did. They probably didn't turn it on.
No.
They'll be here for tomorrow, right?
But they're not the audience.
But they're not the audience,
Right.
and sometimes it's the men who are the allies and that are sort of speaking up. But there absolutely are women, and there are women's organizations that want to put men down. And yes, what I talk about is we need to end the patriarchal systems that only support one type of person in the world, but that doesn't mean that we put men down. And what we need to do is we need to recognize the difference in those two things. And so yes, there are absolutely organizations, but we also need, the more educated that you become on, true feminism and what that really means, the more that you can also be a voice that can push back on some of those things. And we need to allow that too, right? We need to have, allowing men to have those conversations and that pushback to say, you know what? And not say, oh, not all of us, because we understand, everyone knows it's not everyone.
Right.
But, and then that can erode the conversation. But, where we can have a bigger conversation and say, even being willing to put that out there and say, there are organizations and there are women that I feel like, really want to banish every man off the face of the earth as if they don't exist or shouldn't exist. And that's not true feminism. Not the hardcore. It's, there's fringes on everything, and there will always be radical that will move out on other sides. And so, true supportive feminism really wants to elevate both. And we're just asking for women to come up to the places that we've always deserved to be in. And that doesn't mean we have to lower someone else to go there. And that's going to be the clarity and why having these conversations in these places is where the change can happen.
Tonya, you sound incredibly enlightened, but I know that somebody on a journey like you would not describe themselves as enlightened because your journey continues.
Yeah, if someone tells you they're enlightened, run.
Yeah, so let's continue the trajectory then.
Yes.
Where are you going? What's on the horizon for you?
It's a great question. I think I've really learned, one thing that I've really learned to embrace is the lack of control that I actually have. And I started to practice, when I said earlier, when I had nothing left but my name, I'd let fear lead me in a lot of directions. And fear, when we operate from a place of fear, we'll always lose. Right? If we do we'll make the wrong moves and we think they're the right moves, or we'll, create partnerships or say yes to experiences we don't want because, we think, oh, well, they might give us a payday or something like that. But, we'll always lose in some way. And so last year when I was sitting on my deck, I had nothing left but a bag of debt and no job, and, everything was sort of gone. And I was asking myself the question, and I put everything on the table. I put everything on the table. For the first time ever in my career, everything was on the table in terms of maybe I tried and I couldn't do it. And that's okay. Like I wasn't, in an emotional train wreck place. I was like, You
got there. You actually went there.
I went there and I thought, maybe it's okay. Like when I left the corporate world and wanted to do my own thing, I wanted to know if I could. And the question was, maybe I can't. maybe, you know, I just couldn't do this. And, you know, I read a lot of trashy books and drank a bunch of Prosecco. And, you know, I just decided that I've made enough mistakes out of fear. And until I know what my next right move is, I'm not making it. I'm going to sit here and I don't care. You know, I have resources. I'm not, you know, I mean, it's different. Sometimes we don't have a resource. We have to make a move. You know, we're in different situations that way. I still had resources and I still had the ability to take some time for myself before I made that move. And I just let myself experience it without getting up in my head and twisting, you know, squeezing the life out of it like we do, you know, when we're trying to make a decision. And I said, you know, the answer is going to come.
Right.
And one morning I woke up and I said, well, I didn't come this far to come this far.
Let me stop you for a second.
Yes.
One morning you woke up. You're on the deck. One morning you woke up. How long was that transition?
That transition was a couple of months.
Okay.
It was a lot of Prosecco.
Alan knows. Well, it's really important to me because I explore how the person moves from a paycheck or whatever to the other thing. And you just glossed over that. One morning I woke up. 2 months is very clear. Thanks for that.
And it is important. I'm glad that you asked that because it doesn't just happen overnight. You know, we've got to ride that fear. We've got to work through that fear. We've got to harness, you know, through that. Like, you know, you've got that narrative that's going, you have a mortgage, you know, you have a car payment and your savings is you know, and you're taking out of your investments.
Family, friends telling you shouldn't do it, you're crazy.
No,
right?
Because I learned a long time ago to not have conversations with people who couldn't support the conversation.
Okay.
So I was only having conversations with people who could have the conversation with me that, you know, I was working through this in my own way. And if I decided to quit and give up and I, you know, that's my decision in my heart that it's the right one to do, or if I'm going to keep going. And ever since that moment that I woke up that morning and I knew, you know, I said, I mean, Tonya, you started this work ultimately in 2004. You know, there's ups and downs. We're going to ride things. We always want the trajectory of success to be A to Z, you know, and then, but it never happens that way. There's a bunch of squiggly lines. There's some failures. There's some poor decisions. You know, there's some Prosecco or maybe too much Prosecco or, you know, whatever. And there's a lot that happens in that. And what I decided from that moment on is that I will not make any decision ever again from fear or from uncertainty. And if it takes me a month to figure it out, to be with myself, to take those walks, to write that letter to fear, you know, if I have to go, you know, book a couple of sessions with like a coach or, you know, a high performance person or, you know, some of the spiritual advisors that I've worked with over the years, whatever I have to do to get that clarity, that's where I'll make my move. And it has been the first time, and then everything has been on a, you know, a different trajectory. And I'm able to say no to things that don't feel good. And I'm able to say yes to things. So to answer the question of what's next, you know, there's some, you know, pretty nice irons in the fire, so to speak. But, you know, as they always say, until it's actually tangible, sometimes none of that, you know, ultimately matters. But a lot of new doors opening, and I'm really excited for that. And I'm excited for the conversations that, you know, are happening and the tables and the rooms that I'm getting invited into. So I think what's next is hopefully to just continue building this conversation and, you know, never take it for granted that whether it's at the Dollarama that you're having the conversation with someone, or, you know, that you're in some of the top levels of government or biggest industries or some of the top level CEOs in the country, that every conversation, you know, adds to the conversation that we need to have. And so that's my goal, is to just keep going and keep letting those doors open and only make the decisions that feel good, that feel right, not necessarily good, because right and good are not always. Sometimes the good thing is to go home and, you know, and go, oh, I'm gonna, you know, take a week off because I feel like that feels good to, you know, kick up and like drink an extra bottle of Prosecco or something, when like the right thing might be to be up at 6 a.m., you know, working on your business plan or working on the next project. So right and good are not always. So, you know, I always say, does it feel right or does it feel familiar? Because sometimes familiarity makes us think it's right. So we've got to have those, like, you know, that space that we create inside of ourselves. And the more that we can create that space between here and here, the more that we can actually listen to what's right for us. And these are these like moments that you hear all these like really successful people, you know, have talked about. There was just this moment of inspiration. It came to me. You know, I know someone who's an author who struggled their entire career and then went out post-pandemic. You know, their book was a flop. They jumped on their bike, they rode 30 kilometers, stopped and thought, you know, I mean, everything in my life is on life support. Everything is on life support. My marriage, my, you know, everything is on life support. and just had this moment of inspiration, just went back home, wrote, and last year made over $400,000 in book sales on this thing, and had spent 10 years struggling. So it's these moments that we can, when we learn to self-reflect, but create the space between our head and our heart, and just trust those moments of impact, those little things that come that sometimes don't always make sense. And we go, you know what, this feels right. Something about this feels right, so I'm going to follow it. So that's what I'm doing, and that's how I've been doing it. I have dreams and goals and plans and all my maps, mind maps and work maps and business plans all laid out. But I'm also willing to trust sometimes that will be, opportunities will present themselves that, may sometimes take us in another direction. And that as long as it really stays at the core of what I want to do, which is to empower, I say women, but empower human beings to really step into their highest potential, because that's how we change the world. The war is won inside of ourselves, not out there. And if I change, because I changed, thousands and thousands and thousands of people have also changed. And if you change, the people that you get to impact change. So it becomes a trickle-out effect, and that's the part that I'm trusting. I guess more than anything is trusting where I'm being led.
Tonya, this has been a wonderful conversation, and thank you. What piece of advice would you give people? Like, if you're on a journey, you've had a wonderful journey, you've helped a lot of people along the way and continue to do so. You've impacted over 100 women in that room there today. What would be a piece of advice that you'd like to leave the audience with?
That's, I want to say, a tough one. When it's just sort of one piece, but the one thing that I guess I would share with people, or that I feel like leaving with people, is a question that I ask myself every day. If money wasn't an object, if I couldn't fail, if I didn't need to worry, if all my bills were paid and I could, I was living the way I'm living, what would I do? Because I think that's our truth. Because all the noise of our modern day world, of our car payments and gas and inflation and all this fear that is traveling all the way, it makes us lose that connection to ourselves. And so that's a question that I believe that if we all start to ask ourselves that question, if everything was covered, what move would I make here? And I think that really gives us a different perspective on what's right for us.
I'm going to flip that back on you then. What's the answer to that question for you?
For me, to do what I'm doing.
I was going to say, because I know the answer.
Yeah.
I know the answer.
You're doing what you're doing.
I'm doing exactly that.
Yes, and for me, I am doing exactly that, because at the end of the day, it didn't, when we started this, you said it didn't start, when you started over. No, it didn't start. It started in 2004. And, there's a lot of people out there talk about overnight successes and, how fast people's trajectory looks, but nobody ever sees, it's like the iceberg. Nobody ever sees the work or the history, or, I know someone who started a business and they went to, 7 figures in 6 months. But nobody saw the 4 failed businesses and the experience of those 4 failed businesses that taught them how to get that success in 6 months, changed the game. So for me, I am doing it. And the trajectory started for me the day when I didn't have anything left. When I didn't have anything left, I had to find a way to, call my clients back and say, I'm going to keep going. I had to put myself back out there. I had to sort of go, sort of failed. Here we are again. Willingness to sort of let the fire that's burning inside of you for your purpose and your passion to outweigh anything that's burning outside of you. And so for me, that question, I did live through that. And I think my greatest fear was that I would lose everything. And then I did.
Right.
And then it was like, well, I didn't die, and here we are, and so let's just get going. It's time to get going. It's time to get serious about what it is that you're doing. So for me, that was sort of the ultimate thing, where I'd already had the worst case, sort of my worst case, or what I felt was my worst case, happen at that time. And then it answers that question for you when there's nothing left.
Yep.
And if so it was sort of a different way of going about it, because for some people it's like, if I had $1 million and everything was covered, what would matter?
Yeah.
But for me, at the end of the day, when I was sort of left with nothing, a brand that I've been building for, 7-8 years in this world, all of that was sort of gone. Everything that was there, websites, branding, all the trades, all the work, everything was gone. And now you have to go, okay, even though I still have my intellectual property, that's all I have.
Right.
And so then what matters? Still just the same thing matters. So let's get back to what I'm best at, what I do, and what really lights me up every day. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, you can clearly see that you're lit up. There's no doubt about that.
I love what I do, and you know what? I couldn't do it without the people who also, hear this and then invite me into these places. So I'm always really grateful for, every room and every conversation that I've been able to have, including this one, because that's what gives me the platform that I get.
Such an honor to be in conversation with you. I've learned a great deal here today. I feel better about myself.
Good.
I'm sure you do as well, Jerry. I mean, celebrate the Newfoundland and Labrador Construction
Yes.
Association for having the vision to bring you in that
Absolutely.
room, to impact the people in the way that you just impacted us. I think that's remarkable. You're on a wonderful journey, and it was good to be in your orbit for just 30 minutes. I feel something happened here, so that's wonderful. Jerry, your thoughts?
Well, I just, there's so many things. I'm not speechless very often, but I will say this. We were lucky enough to see a lot of the ladies come out of your session, and they were lit up. So, we watched them over talking to you. They wanted to talk to you.
Yes.
So clearly you connected with a lot of people today. And through this podcast, I think you're going to connect with a whole lot more. And it was just a pleasure to have you on here. Thank you for taking the time at the end of your session to come and sit with us.
Thank you for having me here, and I can't wait to see that letter to fear.
Yeah. Do you want to read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Out
If you want
loud
to
on
share
the
it with
podcast.
me, if you want to share it with
Read
me,
it
and
out
then I'll-
loud on the podcast.
If you want to share it with me, and then I'll tell you what to do
Well,
with it.
it's funny you
I
say
think you
that.
just got a free counseling.
I know. But
Not
it's funny.
counseling.
When Alan and I
I
start
always like
this
to make sure people
podcast,
know.
vulnerability
Yes.
is something we talk about, and
Yes.
we have been vulnerable.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I will read out that letter on this podcast.
Okay.
I might.
But
But I don't.
it doesn't even have to be on the podcast because, if you want to share it and then you send it, I can give you some tips of what to do with it. And you don't even have to share the actual letter. I always tell people, whatever these vulnerability letters that you make, burn them.
Yeah.
Get rid of that. Because you don't want to keep the energy, and you just want to, say it's about releasing the charge experience. So you can just get rid of that, safely set it on fire, or tear it up, throw it in the garbage, flush it down the toilet. These kinds of sort of things. But the most important thing is that when we address it, and then what we're going to do about it. That's the thing. So we want to find out what it's here to teach us. So if you want me to do that, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Well, it's funny.
Doesn't
You
have
talked
to be
about
on TV.
your training, your 2-month, trying to come up with what to do. It's taken me 30 years to get to this point with this fine young man next to me. Anyway, it's,
So in 30 years, I'll hear from you. When
possibly.
you're like 40, you'll be 40
thank
then.
you. Yeah, that's
You'll be
right.
Well, it was
Anyway.
another wonderful edition of the
Clue up the
Newfoundland and
day.
Labrador. What's that?
Clue up the day. Sorry,
Yes.
cutting them off again.
The Building Newfoundland and Labrador podcast. What a great day. You finished off the day for us today. So happy that you could be in the conversation, specifically around women in construction. It was a real nice cap to the day. Thank you very much for sharing your journey with us and some of your experiences with us. I think it's going to make a difference. And thank you to the NLCA for having the vision to bring you into the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Wins. That's Gale Force Wins, WINS.com.